Hello and welcome back to A Parent's Guide to Soccer. We're having an informal discussion today about leagues. So a little bit about me. I'm soccer president here for a local nonprofit club in Austin, Texas. I'm a proud father of two boys who both love to play soccer as well as other sports, and I'm an avid soccer player myself. Again, this is really a video series that's 4 parts long where we've already talked about levels of play and financial obligations. And now we're going to spend some time talking about leagues specific to the Central and South Texas area where I live, but also that could be applicable to you depending upon where you live and what level of club play you have. And then the last part in the series that we'll come up to next time is really about questions you should consider asking your club. As far as outcomes, these videos are really designed to be short, easily digestible, and help you understand all the different soccer divisions that are out there. Have a better idea of questions that you could ask your DOCs and your coaches, as well as the clubs themselves, and really to inform you to help find the best club and team that's a fit for you, your commitments for your player, and also for your family. Not every club is a great fit for the player and the family and your lifestyle, so make sure that you've got all the information you can. As far as leagues go, we're not really going to cover recreational and academy. We will maybe a little bit touch on academy, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about select soccer today. So the first thing that you need to understand is how are teams placed into a league. Regardless of whether you're playing in US Youth Soccer or club or whatever league it may be, generally speaking, most U11 teams, that's the first year that they have select, are going to be created and put at various different levels of play based off of your coach and the club's director of coaching based on how competitive they believe your team is. At that point, you're going to play through your season, and based on how well you did, next year when you move up an age group to U12 and above, the team's level is really secured based off of those results in league play throughout tournaments, and teams that finish at the top or at the bottom of their brackets in their league are going to move either up or be relegated down to a lower league. So, just as an example, if you're in the middle league in WDDOA, which is Challenger, and you're at the last place team, odds are you're going to move down next season to Alpha. So, what are the different leagues? For US Youth Soccer, it's divided up into 4 primary different leagues when it comes to South Texas. At the bottom, we have what is called CASA, or the Capital Area Youth Soccer Association, above which is what's called WDDOA, followed by STISA, which is South Texas Youth Soccer Association, and US Youth Soccer Association. So, starting at the bottom, we have what is the CASA leagues. You'll notice there's everything from D4 all the way up to D1. Really, this is primarily used in the South Texas capital area of Texas as a recreational league for all of the clubs that have teams that aren't necessarily going to play select, but have older kids that want to continue to play soccer, love the sport, and wish to play. These teams have a typical home-away model. Teams play at their home fields. They go away and play at an opposing field. Referees are paid by whoever the club is. And teams are fairly competitive, and they really use D3 and D2 as the main competitive vehicles. The other D1, S2, and even D4, well, D4 is primarily used for academy. That's kind of how CASA structures itself. An interesting one that's not on this list, I haven't quite figured out how to place it, is CASA last year came up with the idea of another league, which is called the High School 7-on-7 League. And if you want to learn a little bit more about this, the presentation is available for download for this as well. It's a new league where the older kids that are in high school have difficulty forming a full 11v11 team and having a roster of 14 to 18 kids. It keeps very simple rules for out of bounds, for substitutions, keeps the game faster pace. But really, it's designed for those older players that can't form a full team for rec and don't necessarily want the financial commitment of what you're going to pay for select soccer. Allow them a little bit more relaxed and fun place to be able to play. Next up is WDDOA, and they're divided into Alpha, Challenger, and Prime. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Feel free to pause the video and continue on to give you time to read. But again, alpha is really that entry level, especially for U11 teams, and then as you get older, you will also have alpha for other age groups as well. Teams are always going to continue to move up and down. It keeps the competitive leagues as competitive as possible, while also trying to balance and make sure no team is in the wrong league. They follow a home-away model. Teams generally are going to play at home, and then they're going to play at an away field for the other clubs. Teams have to figure out how to coordinate those games, both home and away, and make sure they have referees. Neutral sites can be used for home games, but primarily most teams plan to play in their home. So our teams in our club play here in the Lakeway/Austin area, and their away games may be at another field in the Austin area or slightly farther away, depending upon the teams they're playing. And again, based on finish, alpha teams may get promoted up to challenger, or depending upon how they play, they may get relegated down to D2 or D3 soccer as it relates to CASA. Challenger, again, they can follow either the home-away model or neutral site model. So a neutral site is really a WDDOA maintained location. So they maintain all the fields, they will provide all of the referees, and essentially your team pays a little bit extra to WDDOA to be able to provide that. So your team fees may be higher if you use a neutral site model, as opposed to home and away, where that cost is either eaten by your club for the home games or the opposing club for their games. Again, much like Challenger or Alpha, this is a league that you will get promoted or relegated to depending upon how you finish in the season, but more competitive than Alpha. And then lastly, there is Prime. Prime really plays on the neutral site model. So again, you're going to generally pay a more expensive fee for this team. It is the highest competitive level within WDDOA, and teams that do really well in Prime at the top of their league are going to get promoted to the next league, which is a STISA league, which is SCL, or State Classic League. Now, State Classic League is, again, it's another league that's under the U.S. Youth Soccer brand. It's really geared towards competitiveness and developing players to be even stronger, and you're going to play against teams that are all over South Texas in the SCL League. Again, if you think about each of these seasons we've talked about, Alpha, Challenger, Prime, and SCL, it's a journey that most teams are on. So if they start at U11 and Alpha, next year maybe U12, they've made it to Challenger, U13, they've made it to Prime, and U14, now they've finally made it to SCL. Again, that's assuming they're at the top of the bracket every year. Another thing to note, and this can apply to any level, teams can request to move up or down outside of the general relegation policies of the league. So if your team is third or fourth but very competitive, the team or your DOC can ask to be moved up or down on the league depending upon how well they're doing. If you do really well in SCL and you're comfortable with the travel that comes with it, next up, the National Frontier Conference, or Frontier for short. This is by far the most competitive league within the southern region. It's for teams all the way from U13 to U19. Again, how I mentioned, it's generally going to be those older teams that get into these higher leagues. They do start as young as U13 on these, and those teams are going to be ones that are going to ask to be moved into the most competitive league. It typically is 12 teams in this, so it's extremely hard to get in to this, and you're going to have to play at the highest levels to get into the Frontier League. If you do extraordinarily well in Frontier, again, there's another path to move above that as well. And that's really where we start to get into Development Academy. Now, Development Academy was formed in 2007 by U.S. Youth Soccer. There are differing opinions between whether DA or Development Academy is top versus ECNL, but as far as youth soccer is concerned, it's the top of the top. There are about 200 clubs that are in this program, and they consider this to be the most competitive. You are going to play against teams all over the country potentially. So again, understand your financial burden and your responsibility when you move into Development Academy. One very, very important note. Players that play in Development Academy are going to be ineligible to play under UIL rules. This means if your child is in Development Academy, they will be ineligible to play high school soccer. So keep that in mind when you are looking at different clubs and different leagues, because if your son or daughter really wants to play high school soccer, it is very, very unlikely they will be able to do that if they play in Development Academy. It's just something to be aware of. So again, if we look at the league structure as far as U.S. youth soccer, again, we kind of start at the bottom with CASA, which is geared mostly towards rec, and there is some kind of WDDOA relegation. Then we get into WDDOA, which is where most of our select programs are across the central Austin area. Then we move up to the STISA leagues, which is Frontier and South Classic League, or SCL for short. And then at the top, we've got Development Academy from U.S. Youth Soccer. Up next is U.S. Club Soccer and the United Soccer Clubs. If we look at their structure, it's fairly similar in that they have 4 different levels. At the bottom, we have kind of the Eastern and Western Conference, moving up to NPL, ECNL, and EPNL. So a little bit about U.S. Club Soccer, or United Soccer Clubs, I should say, which is kind of that bottom tier within U.S. Club Soccer. It was created in 2015, and it really is geared towards the Houston, Austin, San Antonio, kind of southern Texas area. Again, we're talking primarily about clubs in the Texas area. That's where I live and where I'm most familiar with. But again, the higher levels are going to be regional and all across the U.S. As far as the Eastern Western Conference go, if you think back to WDDOA, very similar structure, right? These are going to be typically older teams because this is geared towards, that's where they started, but they're also starting to introduce more U11, U13 teams. And again, it really just is based off geography. So if you're in Houston, you're kind of in the Eastern. If you're in San Antonio and Austin area, you're in the Western. Very simple, very easy to understand. On top of that, within the United Soccer Clubs is also the Champions League. So you've got Eastern and Western, but on top of that is the idea of the Champions League. And really this is related to those 2 leagues moving up. So if you think back to like the Alpha, Challenger, Prime on WDDOA, same sort of structure here. There's an Eastern and Western, and if you're doing really well within your division or your conference, then you can move up to the Champions League. On top of U.S. or the United Soccer Clubs within the U.S. Club Soccer, have we said that? Is that confusing enough yet? Is NPL. And NPL is a national competitive platform. So again, this is going to be where we're playing against very competitive teams. I would akin this to similar to more on the Frontier side. So they don't necessarily have like an SCL equivalent, but it's very akin to like the Frontier side of the house on U.S. youth soccer. So NPL is very competitive. It's geared towards long-term player development. It's really top soccer clubs across the country. They do integrate with a thing called the ID2 program, which is really about helping develop staff, helping identify players that are moving through the process, and getting them ready for both the NPL finals and potentially moving up to things like ECNL or EPNL. Interesting thing to note, players that play in U.S. Club Soccer all the way through ECNL and EPNL, they are eligible to play high school soccer. So just a few minutes ago I mentioned how DA, you are ineligible under UIL rules to play high school. ECNL players can and do play for high school soccer clubs. Continuing up the pyramid, we then get into ECNL. This is founded back in 2009, has a long history. The goal of ECNL is really started with female soccer and said, hey, let's look at, back then there weren't a lot of great opportunities for top-tiered female staff and players, and so ECNL was created to give them a very innovative way and be able to play at the highest levels of soccer, specifically for females. And then the last piece is that U.S. Club Soccer and ECNL have come up with this idea of creating a ENPL, or the Elite National Premier League, which is really geared for, again, much older players, so U14 all the way through U18, U19, and giving them the top of ECNL an even more competitive place to go. So where ECNL has, dozens and dozens of clubs and hundreds, if not thousands, of players, this is now taking the cream of the crop from ECNL and elevating them to EPNL. So again, if we look at the structure of how the clubs are organized, USC with the Western Eastern Conference going up to Champions League, and then going on up to NPNL, ECNL, and EPNL, which is a relatively new thing. The last league I want to talk about, which is local here to us in Austin, is the Lone Star League. So again, for players that are in the local Austin area, this is the other league that your players may play in as part of Select or Academy. And the reason I mention that is because there's two leagues within Lone Star. There's the Super League of Austin, and there's also Academy League. So again, the Academy League for Lone Star is really geared towards U10 and below. So I believe they start at U6 for their Academy program, all the way to U10. And that is geared towards Academy. There's multiple clubs all over the Austin area, including Lone Star, Westlake, Lake Travis Elite, and others that play in that Academy League. The Super League of Austin is a club that's run by Lone Star, and it's geared for select teams on the younger side, so U11, U12, and they're starting to get more traction at the older age groups as well. And it is a local Austin area, so teams that aren't necessarily wanting to travel long distances, they'll be competitive with teams around the city. So to summarize the different leagues that are available, there are a lot of options available. So when you're looking at your club or your team, these are all of the different leagues and kind of how they're laid out as far as tiering structure. So again, if you're coming into a new club, understand what level is your team at? What are the options? What's the highest level that your club has? If you've got a soccer superstar and they only have teams that go up to WDDOA Alpha, well, that's something you're going to probably want to find out very soon, because that will play into your decision-making process about what club you want to go to. So a couple closing thoughts. Make sure you ask lots of questions. Tryouts, conversations with the club, you're going to want to understand it as much as you can so there's no surprises on your side or on theirs, depending upon what you want to do. Be prepared to look around. There are a lot of clubs, both within the Austin area, but wherever you may live, and understand what those clubs are and what they can offer. There are going to be fewer teams that offer DA, ECNL, EPNL, NPL teams. So if you have a top-tiered soccer player, you're going to want to make sure you look for teams that already have those programs in place. It's very difficult to get new clubs added into those. Your club has to consistently perform at the top. So make sure you understand those, and just help set up your players for success, right? Yes, at the younger ages, you may change a few clubs a few times if they don't ask those questions ahead of time, because you haven't found that club that's the right fit. It's hard when you're constantly moving to different clubs to get that family and get that player well established. So ask as many questions as you can, understand everything you can, and lastly, a couple resources for you. Again, pause the video if you want to take a look at this, but there's lots of things around here in the Austin area as well as national levels at US youth and club soccer levels. And one of my personal favorite sites is actually soccerparenting.com. It is a fantastic resource for information about training, behavior, both for players, for coaches, and for parents, as well as expectations and things to understand. So again, I'd like to say thank you for attending my short, but roughly 20-minute presentation on leagues. There's a lot to go over here. I hope you found it informative, and have an awesome day.